Hello, legends and super legends. Welcome to Veloharmony Live. Today we're going to be talking about since I want to start talking about the different kinds of power meters that are out there. You know, they have crank-based power meter, pedal power, power pod. You know, the different kinds. Depending on which ones you're doing, it really is not going to vary much from the general understanding that you need to understand power. So feel free to post questions and so forth as we go, so that way it will help me focus on what we need to be talking about. So the main thing is that if you're training with power, you cannot ignore how you feel, because if you're feeling bad, the power meter is not going to know. That's why a lot of people that use power meter also use heart rate monitor. The importance is that you don't want to ignore how your body feels and try to force yourself into a particular workout if you're not feeling up to par. Please let me know if we're having any audio problems, because this is something new we're trying, and we're still working with YouTube to get this bomb proof, so to speak. The last week, Ali was very helpful in letting us know that there were some audio difficulties when we started, and we went ahead and got that resolved. So I hope that you guys appreciate this new format. I'm kind of liking it as we improve the reliability of it. Using the encoder is a bit different. So let's talk about power meters. There are different kinds of power meters. Let me share a screen here. I think I have a picture of some of them. Here we go. So for example, the one I'm using currently on the right is made by a company called Velocomp, and they call it the Power Pod. I got the pitot tube attached, and they have one that looks like that they call the Aero Pod, because it basically, that tube allows you to track wind resistance and so forth. And so whether you're using the Power Pod or the rally pedals that you see on the left, or whether you're using crank-based power meter, or whether you're planning on getting them, don't just go with somebody saying, oh, you need to get this power meter. You need to focus more on what you need, you know. Thanks a lot, Lupus. I appreciate it. Appreciate your feedback there. Okay, Lupus using Favero Asiomo Duo. Very happy with it. Yeah, the Favero is a power pedal as well. Let me pull up what it looks like. Let's do this. I think I can bring that here. Yeah. Let's pull up the Favero. You need to get what works for your budget. That's really very important. Um, it doesn't really matter whether you go with crankbase or whatever. If you have multiple bikes and your desire is to, okay, I've got several bikes, I want to be able to use my power meter on all of them, then you need something that's portable. So like Lupus says he's got the Favero Asioma. Well, it's a power pedal. You can just take it off of a bike, put it on another one. It's the same thing with the Rally, or even the Cyclops has a power pedal that's been out for a while. So if you're looking for something that's portable, then you want to go with things that are not fixed to just one bike. Because the crank-based stuff is not something you can transfer easily. It won't be as practical. I'm going to pull up the Vivero on here so you guys can see it, those of you who may not be familiar. They make I think they have a single and a dual in this model. That's what it looks like here. DC Rainmaker, who I mention a lot, he does, I don't spend a lot of time doing in-depth reviews on these because he's already done it. Shane Miller does some too. But this is a very reliable power pedal, and it's priced fairly well. You can see, you know, 7 something. The rally pedal that you see here are around like 1,000, maybe 1,100. You know, they just came out, so if you find them on sale, you might get them around 8, 9. You know, it's still kind of up there for, you know, power pedals. But regardless of which ones you get, don't just go and start looking at power when you ride. You need to do a functional threshold test, your FTP, for your power, so you can get your zones and derive your training zones. That will help you a lot, because the pedal really tells you after you've done the work what you're doing as far as watts. So you have to know ahead of time which zones you want, and then you can calculate if you want to train by watts per kilo and so forth. This live session is just to give you a general understanding. So if you're considering training with power, you approach it cautiously, because buying a power meter and just going out and looking at watts will drive you nuts if you don't have the right settings. So for example, on my Garmin Edge, they allow you to set like a 3-second or 10-second delay or different things. So you have to look at what kind of training you're doing. When I'm doing a lot of long, steady, hard efforts, I may increase the display of the power to like 10 seconds. Otherwise, if you do just actual power, it jumps all over the place. You'll see 0, 1 second, like when you soft pedal. You know, you saw that last week in the last video where I was drafting and we're riding fast, and then 0 showed up, and then it jumped to 70 and then to 300. So the power meter is trying to respond to what you're doing. And when we're riding in a pace line, there's a lot of time when you're soft pedaling or you're not pedaling as much because people are slowing down. So it does vary. So if you're looking at actual power, it jumps all over. So it's not something that you want to really look at all the time. You want to have, they have normalized power and different kinds of power readings that you can use that would make sense to you. And you want to go for an average that is reasonable, so you can know, okay, for 10 seconds when I'm pedaling, I'm in this range of 150 to 250 or whatever. That would make more sense than just looking at just power. And that's what we're discussing here today. And on a long climb or a long effort, your power zones will track closely with your heart rate zones if you've got them figured out correctly. They're not going to be the exact numbers, but the ranges will be like you'll be in zone 2 for power and zone 2 for heart rate on a steady effort. I'm not talking about where you're doing attacks and sprints and so forth. That's different, because heart rate is not a factor in a lot of the anaerobic efforts. And that's where power meters really play. That's their strength, giving you those high watts when you really do anaerobic, short, intense efforts. So keep that in mind as you consider using different power meters. So now let's say you've got your power meter. For example, I'm going to use the example with the Garmin Rally. I just got one in last week into the shop to test. And my first issue with it was it showed up with this. I don't know if you can see that right here. That's the battery compartment right there. It was loose. That's kind of like selling a car with the tires loose. It's supposed to be tightened to 5 Newton meters. You know, I happen to be an engineer and I've played with these things, so I kind of knew once the lights, you're supposed to get these lights on the pedal right here. They give you different like green, red, and different things as you set them up. Well, I wasn't getting any light on the left, but I was getting plenty of light on the right. And when I connected it to my Garmin Connect account, it worked fine. Even I used the head unit, and I connected it to the head unit. It picked it up. But then when I went to use it on my Garmin app on my phone, because that's a good way to set it up, and it suggests that you use that because you can also register it without having to do a registration. They get to know because Garmin is on that app. Well, it connected the right but not the left. It couldn't find the left. And something told me, just check. And sure enough, the battery compartment was loose. Well, I could have lost that on a ride. Because if you're riding and it's loose, it can just fall and you wouldn't even know. But then your power would just cut out and you get blank. You wouldn't even get zero. It would just be blank. So I checked both of them. The right was tightened, the left was not. They really need to watch that. And so I tightened both to 5 Newton meters, which is what they recommended. And as I tested it, I made sure I confirmed during the ride that it was still holding, which is fine because they've improved the threads is now aluminum. So they're metal threads and they hold really well. They even send you extra O-rings. What I'm getting at is all these gadgets have their issues. There are times when they may crap out. So don't depend on just one form of training. Having a heart rate monitor is really good. Use your power meter in combination and also pay attention to how you feel because feel is number one. So that if these things crap out, you can still finish your ride or finish your workout because they're just giving you feedback. They're not riding. They're not pedaling the bike. Just remember that. Don't get dependent on any one thing. So far, I'm going to talk about the positives of what I've experienced with the rally pedals. First thing is I had to take out, let's see here. Steven says he's using the power part card, frustrating to calibrate it at first, but great, now it's working. The amount of now in the eyes of sucker is awesome. I will talk about that in a little while, Steven. Let me, I share your frustration and I share your positives about the software. So yes, I will talk about that. What I want to talk about though is that with, unlike the power pod, the first thing I had to remove, well, I didn't have to remove it, but the pedals, the power pedals did not need to use the speed sensor, and it did not need, I did not need to any longer use my Cadence accelerometer. It was one of those Garmin attachments that was just on my crank arm that I've always had nothing to do with power pod or whatever. But because this power meter from the Rally RS200, it provides your cadence as well. So I read the technical documents, and what they said is even if you keep your cadence sensor on and activated, the power meter will override the cadence reading and basically display cadence from the power meter on your head unit, whether you're using a 530 or whatever, it doesn't matter. But basically, it's going to display cadence and power because that's part of the calculation that it's using. And so that negated the need for a cadence meter. So I took that off. I took off the speedometer and just went out and rode. And sure enough, you know, even when it was there, I could tell it was still active, but it was trying to connect to my cadence meter, even though the cadence meter had always been there. The head unit was still trying to connect to it. So I just took it off and disabled it in the head unit and used that. So you have less stuff to carry. It appeared to display about the same ranges as the power pod. I didn't see that much. I mean, there was no way I could use both because I don't have a second head unit because you can't pair both at the same time. Now, the other hassle was, unlike the power pod, I only had to calibrate the power pod once to a bike. And once it's done, you just go and you ride. And every time you want to ride, it just is ready to go. Well, these pedals have to be calibrated every ride. And, you know, they do like the zero offset and so forth. It doesn't take long to do, but that's just something with it. They all have their issues. So if you get the Favero or you get the crankbase, you want to read through your documents and make sure you pay attention to that. It's important that you follow what they require because all of them got their own little issues. I'm trying to get my chat a little larger here. For some reason, the fonts are really small. Not really sure why. I can see the one on the screen, so it's fine. So Dwayne says, I'm flirting with the idea of purchasing a power meter, but I think heart rate training and monitoring serves the same purpose. They don't really serve the same purpose. They're not the same. So no, that's not true. Um, Training with power is something completely different. And if you don't use a power meter, you're not going to be training with power. If you're using a heart rate monitor, you're going to be training with heart rate. If you're using feel, you're going to be training with feel. So let's talk about those things. For example, training with heart rate. The last ride I did, it was very hot. Went out there and I could tell my heart rate was elevated more so than it normally is. Well, that's going to throw you off. Your heart rate is influenced by environmental factors. The power meter is not. Completely different. The power meter is always consistent. When you, whatever power meter you have, once you get through the glitches or whatever you need to set up, when they are set up, you basically have a gadget that does not care about how cold it is, how hot it is, whether you're sick, whether you're well or not. It doesn't care. All it says is you just put out 70 watts. You just put out 300 watts. It does not care. That's all the more reason why you need to be very cautious in how you use a power meter. If you're feeling bad, don't force yourself to go and use a power meter to the detriment of your health. That's very important. So you need to keep that in mind. That's why I started out saying that feel was very important, because if you don't feel good, you can't say, oh, well, I was supposed to train at 500 watts today or whatever, do intervals. You don't feel good, you change the training. Same thing with heart rate. You're supposed to train at certain times, and let's say you just can't get to those zones because your body's tired or whatever is going on. You have to listen to how you feel. Those gadgets are tools that you use when you are in a condition to benefit from them. There's no point in trying to force it when you're not well or at your best. And I'm going to add this, even without those gadgets, if you are competing or doing whatever, if you don't feel well, that's not the time to either work out or compete or whatever. So yeah, that doesn't change anything. Just keep that in mind. It's very important. You can't just say, well, I've got a power meter, so now what? A power meter does not make you stronger. A power meter is a tool to help you focus your training so that you can focus on controlling how well you improve. And when you improve, you can control the timeline better. You can use your time better with heart rate. They're pacing tools. You can pace with heart rate. You can pace with power meter. So if you have none of those, then you can pace with, am I going 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5? That's good. You cannot pace with speed. Don't kid yourself. That's nothing. You could take speed off of your display and you wouldn't miss it. People are just used to speed because speed is feedback. Even in your car, I'll use that for an example. If you're driving from Houston to Dallas and it's winter and the wind's blowing from Dallas to Houston, heavy wind. If you held the same speed, let's say 70 miles an hour on the highway, you would get to Dallas in the same amount of time that it would take you regardless, but you would burn more fuel on the trip where the wind was blowing from North Dallas into Houston. You would burn less fuel on the trip where the wind is blowing from the south, like in the summer. It's the same thing with the human body. So when you're out training and it's windy or whatever else, you're not going to ride as fast with the same effort. So it's very important that you focus on effort versus speed, because speed is controlled by the tires you have, the surface of the road, the wind, and so forth. And then it displays what speed is being put out based on that effort. So effort is more important if you're going to do anything useful, especially on the bicycle. Because if you don't train with effort, then you can cheat yourself thinking that you're getting a workout. So Jeffrey says the power pod is definitely for a data data. I guess he said he meant data nerd. Squiggly lines is part of my daily. Yeah, if you're into details and you don't mind fiddling with stuff, the power pod works. The power pod has its issues. What I ran into was sometimes it would just quit, and then I would call support, and they told me, okay, you need to hold the button for say 10 or 12 seconds, and it would reboot like a computer would. Once you understand those little nuances about it, it just works. It does its job. It's consistent. So yeah, it's good enough. Now the power pod also works with in conjunction with a what I call like a power base. I mean, like a you could use a power pedal. You could use a crank base. Power meter to calculate other things that Velocomp offers. They have other things that they tell you, that you can get access to other pieces of information like your aerodynamics while you're riding, all of that. But you would need the power pod in conjunction with another power meter that is strain gauge based for you to be able to calculate that. So the pod has a lot of uses besides just using it for giving you power readings. And those of you who are into that, So yeah, it is important that you don't get hung up on these gadgets. I took the time to do this so that people understand that it's nice to have those tools, but you can train without them. But having those tools allows you to really dial in your training and focus your training. So if you only have an hour to train, after your warm up, you can keep yourself in the necessary zone for that period of time so that you're not just out riding around for an hour and a half. That's really important. That's the benefit of having those kind of tools for training. It really allows you to focus, you're not wasting time. It basically eliminates, let's say, what you get from a group. The group will always push you. And so, but with your own training tools, or even you don't even need tools, just the focus to know that I'm gonna go full gas for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever, even when you're training by yourself. But these tools help you really get objective feedback. Heart rate monitor is good for training. I don't want to say it's not. I'm just saying that you need to understand what's going to happen when the situations are different, meaning that it's hot, I'm not used to it, or my readings are going to be off. They're going to be elevated. It's almost like having a faulty power meter that's giving you higher watts than you normally get. Similar to that. So then in that situation, you would understand that, okay, it may say I'm 170 beats per minute, but you can tell by how you feel that, yeah, this is really not 170. I'm not going that hard. It shouldn't be 170, but it's saying that it is. And you need to respect that and understand that. Don't pat yourself on the back and say, oh, I'm working hard. Well, you're not working that hard, because when you're not acclimated to the situation, let's say whether it's altitude or heat, your body has to compensate. And so, yeah, your heart rate will spike. That doesn't mean you're in that zone. So you need to understand that and be realistic, So, yeah, Dwayne says that makes sense. Yeah, it is what it is, Dwayne. Nothing wrong. I mean, think about it. Before power meters were prevalent, people trained with heart rate monitors. People just rode their bikes. They're not needs. They're nice to have. I'm not saying they're not useful. But what I'm saying is, if you really want to focus, yes, they're great tools. But if you don't want them or you can't afford them, they're not required for you to improve on the bike. You just don't have as much aid, let's say, because with these tools, they help you focus. When I'm coaching somebody, I want them to have preferably a power meter if they can afford it. But if they can't, then they need to rely on heart rate. They've got to have one of these tools. Speed is not something I can coach anybody with. That's just not. It's not a metric. It's not a pacing tool. So if those of you who have been pacing yourself by speed, forget that. You're wasting your time. So let's see here. Mr. Esteban said, how do you use the power pod indoors like mounted on a trainer? Yeah, you would need the software that was mentioned by one of our legends here. You get into the software and then you set the power pod profile for indoor training. Then you would need to switch it out to go back on the road, but it is set up to where you can use it indoors, but you'd have to switch the profile in the software. That's why they have a very detailed instruction for how to install their software, because it's really particular. It is not difficult. You just have to follow the steps, and the software works. You connect it via USB, and then you switch to the indoor profile, and you can use it on an indoor trainer. But then to go back on the road, you got to hook it up to the software and put it back to the road setting. So let's see here. Maverick says, I like the power meter. I can be in zone 5 and heart rate zone 2, much more efficient than heart rate. It's just different. The reason why I use both, I use heart rate and I use the power meter. The power meter is more of a thing where I'm saying, okay, I want to do 450 plus watts for the next several minutes or whatever. And I want to see that I'm doing that, because I can still tell by the way my muscles feel and how, my legs are responding, what zone I'm in. Now, what you're saying here, Maverick, you said, I can be in zone 5 and heart rate zone 2. Okay, I've talked about that before. The zones on the power meter, like once you get your zones derived, regardless of what zone your heart rate is in, your heart rate gets in a zone to pump the blood you need for the effort you're doing based on your fitness. And I'm leading somewhere with this, so bear with me. Based on your current fitness, if you're riding with another rider who is fitter than you, and both of you are in zone 2 heart rates, for example, okay? His zone 2 heart rate is going to be different than your zone 2 heart rate. So his zone 2 heart rate, he's going faster. And your zone 2, you may need to be in zone 4 heart rate to keep up with him. Keep that in mind. That has no bearing on the watts you're putting out, because you still put out watts regardless of what zones you're in. The watts are the amount of force that you're putting on the pedal. Now, what gets you in the necessary zone? So for example, if I'm putting out 350 watts and I hold it for 3 minutes, based on my fitness, I may get into zone 4 or almost zone 5 in that period. The next guy who is fitter than me, he may only get into zone 3. But he's doing the same wattage for the same duration. What am I getting at? Anybody can do 500 watts for a second, let's say. What matters is the watts you do and how long you hold it for. So don't get hung up on, oh, I'm in zone 5, heart rate, and then I'm in zone 2. Well, stay in zone 5, you said power meter. Stay in that zone 5 for any period of time, your heart rate will catch up, because it's going to have to work harder for you to continue to do that effort. That's why I said earlier that when you're doing longer, steadier efforts, they track closer because the effort is steady. When you're doing surges, just how in races, those of you who have ever raced or you watch races, that's the reason you see the pros in Europe. When they attack on a flat road, they go zigzag. They're attacking, they're changing direction so that anyone who wants to go with them will have to work just as hard. They're not giving you an easy wheel. When the pace is not steady and there's a lot of accelerations, it's a lot harder on the body than when it's steady. So there are different kinds of efforts. I talk about it all the time. You might go to a group ride that day and everybody holding it steady. Well, don't pat yourself on the back, because if somebody gets there and starts changing the pace all over the place, you might have trouble if you haven't trained that way. So the same thing I'm talking about. If you're surging to zone 5 on the power meter and then you back off right away, yeah, your heart rate might just say zone 2, because you didn't stay there long enough for the heart rate to feel like I got to get up to zone 5, to make up for the effort he's doing to pump nutrients to the muscles or whatever. So anaerobic efforts for short periods of time have a different impact on heart rate than what you see on the power meter. So yeah, your power meter, you might do 750, 800 watts. But if you don't hold it very long, the heart rate will stay low. But another example, if you're in heart rate zone 2 and you're cruising along steadily in zone 2, and let's say you're doing 180 watts or 200 watts, and then all of a sudden you decide to go to 400 watts, well, the heart rate takes a while to catch up. So yeah, you can get up there quickly, but if you stay there long enough, the heart rate will come up to that zone. And you have to focus on your tolerance to be able to adapt. If you can't handle those zones physically, you'll have to back off on that effort that you're putting out. So just keep that in mind. Let's see here. So I hope that explained a little bit. I wanted for what's his name doing to just kind of understand that it's not. Don't get hung up on, I put out 800 watts. You guys saw a video 2 weeks ago. I made it clear. I did 1,000 watts for maybe 20 seconds. I did it for as long as I needed to catch those guys. And then when I got there, it was like I got there so quickly, and I knew based on my fitness, I could continue. So that's why I passed them. The point I'm trying to get to is, if you want to be able to sustain a certain watt range, for example, that's why I talked about doing your zones. For whatever kind of riding you're doing, you've got to train accordingly. So you can't just go and do 400 watts and expect to stay there for a long period of time if you've never done it. You have to build your tolerance to stay in that zone. But you don't start with that kind of training. You have to have a strong base to start with, and then you get up to it over time. That's why you need a good training plan, training program, and you gradually do it. When you do it that way, it's so much more fun than trying to kill yourself to get up there, because you won't be able to sustain a high wattage if you've never been there. That's why people get dropped, because your body's going to have to recover. It does not matter. You'll get dropped because if you go to 800 watts and you've never been there and the climb's not over, you'll be climbing alone because you'll have to back off because you have not prepared your body to handle that effort. That's why I talk about, nobody cares. People talk, I'm riding 500 miles a week or 400. Nobody cares. It's, how are you doing those miles? Are you doing it for the event you're training for? Or are you just doing it? Oh yeah, I just love riding my bike and I'm doing 400 miles a week or whatever. That's great. But don't expect to keep up with a guy doing 200 miles a week who's hitting 750, 800 watts for 20, 30 seconds because he's preparing for some event. It's a different kind of riding. It's a different kind of engine that he's building. That's what it's about. And it does not matter. You don't have to do those hard efforts if you're never going to ride like that. So everybody rides differently. That's why when I'm out spinning in my neighborhood, people always chase. Like especially, during the week, I'll just go to loosen up. And you're out spinning around. There's always some cyclists want to catch you. And I always just smile as they come by. I always just wave, and they go on by. Then they start looking behind to see if I'm going to chase them. I've got my own plan when I'm out there. And that's why you got to keep in mind, everybody's doing different things at different times. So don't go out there just be chasing people, wasting your energy. Unless that day you were doing intervals and you decided, hey, I'm going to use this guy and I'm going to chase him down as my interval or something like that. That's fine. But you have to ride for the kind of riding. You have to train for the kind of riding you're going to be doing. Somebody said my volume is a bit low. Let me turn it up a little bit. I hope this is better. Yeah, I've got this microphone. But anyway, let's see here. Let's see what we got. Continuous training with the old school. I'm doing well for my 62 years old. Yeah, you just need to ride your bike consistently, and then you want to fine tune. That's how the pros train. That's how I train when I used to compete. I worked on my base until within a period of time of an event. Then I started to do specific efforts that I was talking about a little while ago to get me ready for that event. Because if I'm going to be doing events where there's going to be a lot of accelerations, I need to be ready for that. Think about it. I need to be able to change speed and so forth. I can't just ride steady all the time. The steady stuff builds your base, and then you take it from there to the next level. So you have to prepare specifically for your event so that you can really excel. Anything in life, you have to prepare for it. So somebody posted up there that heart rate is useless for short intervals. Yeah, if you're doing a 20-second sprint, when I do my sprints, I don't even wear my heart rate monitor. I don't depend on those things. I know how I feel. So it's like a 20-second sprint, that's anaerobic. That's your legs turning a big gear hard and fast. So it's kind of you don't want to overreach. You do want to have a plan, and you do want to listen to your body, because part of training is not just the work, it's also the recovery. The reason I decided to talk about training with power is because we have more choices now about regarding the kind of power meters that are out there. If you're going to train with power, there is a book written, I've talked about it before. Let me see if I can find it, because I do recommend that. Let's see here. You use a book or a training plan or a coach or whoever you decide to work with. You need to understand training with power. Let me see if I can find that. Let's see over here. All right. I think it's written by a guy named Coogan. Let's see, Training with Power. Yeah, somebody said Training with Power Meter book. This is the book, and it's very inexpensive. I see here thrift books, and then on Amazon it's 18, but this is like used. I'll just put the picture up here. Let's see here. I have a copy of the book. I used it. Now it's not for entertainment. It's like going to class. So, it focuses mostly on, it's very technical, but it's to the point. And they have different tests that you can do to kind of get your zones and so forth. It's like $18 new. It says $3.99 to $23 on this thrift books or whatever, but the writer is Hunter Allen and Andrew Coogan, the writers. Very good book, very technical if you really want to understand training with power. Now, it's not required that you get that book, but it would be nice if you had somebody that you could work with to help you understand training with power. The minimum thing. Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that. We got a super chat there. The minimum thing you need to understand is that I need to get my power zones, do your threshold test, just like you do for heart rate. You get your average power. Thanks, Stephen. You do your average power and you figure out your zones. Once you get your zones, then you use that as a guide. Now, here's what I recommend. You know what your zones are, for example, after you've done your test. One particular day is a day where you're going to focus on a particular zone. So, for example, if today, let's say you're going to do a long endurance ride, all you need to remember is what your zones are. Now, if you have one of these head units, whether it's the 530, the Wahoo, whatever, enter your zones in there. But don't turn on all these alarms. Like some people, it will beep when you get outside that zone or whatever. It just gets a bit too much. All you want to do is know that my endurance zone is 160 to 2 something or whatever. Just remember that on that particular ride, most of the time, those are the numbers you want to see. And it stays in your head unit because at the end of the ride, the head unit will tell you anyway what where you spend the most time. So you don't need to be worrying about it. What I'm getting at is it takes the fun out of the ride if for 2 hours you're just looking at that head unit to see if you're in that zone. Just gauge it from time to time and say, oh, okay, I need to up it a little bit. That's all you want to look for, the focus. On the days when you're supposed to be in a higher zone, you're only going to do that when you're doing those specific laps or intervals. You're not going to ride at 400 watts for 3 hours. We do long rides, and sections of those rides have intervals in them. I've explained what intervals are on the channel. If you search on the channel videos for intervals, I've explained what they mean. An interval is a period of time. So on a 3-hour ride, you might have 3 blocks of 20 minutes where you're supposed to hit those zones. That's when I look at that. And all I do is I switch to they call them training pages. Thanks, Dwayne. They call them training pages on your head unit. The training pages will show you what kind of display you have, So I set a training page that is just for doing laps. And then I have a training page that tells me time of day, temperature and that kind of stuff. That's my default. But when it's time to do laps, I only have like 4 or 5 fields. I have cadence, then I have whatever pacing tool, the effort I'm using. I have heart rate, and then I have power together. Then I have grade. That's it. I don't even have speed. I don't care how fast I'm going. I want to know how hard I'm working. And because I only have 4 or 5 fields, for example, the fonts are huge. So it's easy to see. So you just glance, especially on the 1000 Garmin. The fields are big. And so I just have the necessary stuff for my laps. That's it. And I use that even in the group ride. If I'm going to attack during the group ride, I will flip to that and push my lap button, and let's see how hard we're going for this period of time. And you can use that as a gauge when you train alone, But don't plan to just have the whole ride worried about, am I in that zone or whatever? No. If the focus of the ride says that you should only hit zone 4 for 10 minutes or whatever, depending on what training plan you're using, when you start your ride, forget about the computer. Just warm up, enjoy the sights until you get to where you're ready to do that lap. That's how you do it. It makes it more interesting and you're more pumped when it's time to do that lap. And then when you're done with the lap, you just forget about the gadget and just ride. Just kind of let your body recover until you're ready to go again, until you do as many. I always say that you should always get home feeling like you could do a little more. Don't get home wiped out on a regular basis. That means you're overreaching. You want the event to push you to that level. But in training, you need to work hard, but not wipe out yourself all the time. Let's see here. Nat Sim says, how to avoid the legs burning quickly on 10-minute plus intervals before the heart rate can even go up when working around threshold power. Yeah, your legs are burning because you probably have too low of a cadence. So if you want to avoid your legs, because 240 watts at 110 RPMs treats your leg differently than 240 watts at 60 RPMs. I'm using that as an example. Noel Pagan, welcome. So keep that in mind. Your legs are burning because you're overloading them. That's why your legs are burning. And since you didn't say what range of cadences you were keeping, that's why I went that route. But that's usually the cause. You're overloading them, so you can't reach 10 minutes, or The zone you're trying to hit is beyond your current capability if you are in your cruising cadence range. You see how training becomes a science? And that's why it's hard to answer questions like that, because it's unique to each person. So let's see. Palmer says he's 62. He was a semi-professional rider, never used any. I think he just meant that he only did sensation, went by sensation. Yeah, a lot of riders, I mean, these things are prevalent now, but people have been riding the bike for centuries without them. They're tools like any tool that you can use to improve. They are not a guarantee that you will improve, because why? You still have to do the work. And secondly, you can't trump genetics, courage, ability to suffer. Those are all intangibles that are there. You can have two riders with the same talent, and one can edge the other out based on his mental toughness. Because going hard is not a whole lot of fun. You have to be willing to suffer. You have to really push your body. But for you to push your body safely, you have to have prepared your body to tolerate that. And I always mention that on here because we have different levels of riders here. Don't sit on the couch for 3 months and get up and go try to hit zone 5. You might just get dizzy and pass out. We don't want that happening. So you've got to do the work. You got to do the work. You got to build a foundation before you can get, to start hitting these zones. So don't just go and say, oh, I want to go full gas, because your full gas won't be a whole lot if you have not prepared. Just keep that in mind, Nat Sim says, thanks for the answer. You're welcome. I hope I got that right. But that's usually what it is. You need to focus more on your gear selection, because you generate power with cadence. You generate torque with force. Keep that in mind. If you make that gear too big, you won't have the power to keep up with riders that are using the proper mechanical gear selection. They have an advantage, meaning they have momentum. You see it all the time. Riders stop at a light, they don't shift to the proper gear, the light changes, and you see them trying to get that gear rolling. I don't know why people don't shift. If you're trained with power, those of you who have the Favero and whatever else, try it on your next ride. When you stop at a light, downshift in a mild gear, like a low gear, and when the light changes, accelerate. Look at the power meter. It will rev. You'll see like 250. That's how you generate power. You generate power, then you shift up. It saves your legs, and it's more efficient using that velocity. So you cannot just, leave it in a large gear. You don't generate any power in a large gear. You can maintain where you've gotten to, but to take off, you need to be in the proper gear to accelerate without over wearing out your muscles, because it's not efficient to drag a huge gear every time you slow down. That's why we shift. I'm always replacing the right cable on my bike more than the left. I shift like crazy. I like to be on top of the gear. Somebody had asked on one of the sessions, what do you mean by on top of the gear? That's different for everybody. Depending on the gear you select and your fitness level, one gear might be fine for me and you might need something else. But we can still generate the same speeds. Because lighter riders, they use smaller gears generally because they don't have to put out as much watts per kilo, especially in situations where you're fighting gravity when you're climbing. But I'm carrying around an extra 20 kilos, So at 80 something kilos and somebody else is 60 something kilos, they've got an advantage on a climb. So that's not where you're going to really try to chase a light rider. You wait till the downhill or the flats where you have more of an advantage. There was a race recently, what was it? The Tour de Suisse, and Mathieu Van der Poel won 2 stages in succession. And on the second stage, after winning, the reporter asked him, you won again, what does this say? Are you going to win the race? And then what he said was, we'll see, he said, because once we get to the mountains, it's a little more difficult for me. He's a big guy. So he has to work harder than the lighter Alaphilippes in them. And he recognizes it. So you need to recognize what terrain favors your body type. That's the reality of it. So he already, as young as he is, he knows there are just certain races that favor him, where his power is maximized. But he can't climb at that effort for 20 kilometers. He has to work so much harder against gravity. And you probably have wondered about that, why these guys win certain races but not the other. Well, if you're not built like a climber, you're going to have to work so much harder to put out the same effort as a light rider on a climb. But on a flat road or rolling terrain, yeah, you have the advantage as a bigger rider. You can generate more force, displace more air. It's just different. So, yeah. So Nat Sim says around 80 cadence, but at some point it goes down naturally, and trying to go up make them burn even quicker. What it sounds like to me, Nat, 80 cadence is not high. It's average. You should be able to pedal faster than that. And, as you ride more, you should train your body. So you need specific workouts to improve your cruising cadence. And you'll be able to tolerate that easier. Or maybe on that day you were tired. The day you were trying to do the interval, maybe you were tired, maybe from some prior workout. But you should be able to pedal faster than 80 during the intervals. When I'm doing an intervals, I'm triple digit when I'm doing intervals. When I'm just riding with the bunch, yeah, it might be 75 to 90, just sitting around. But when it's time to work, yeah, you got to be 100, 105 or more. So you need to look into that and maybe get a plan to work on that effort. So it's one of those things to where if you had a coach, he would tell you, I can't tell you because I don't know what you've been doing or where you are or what your goals are or what kind of riding you're into. All of that matters. If you're not in the kind of riding that requires that, but I still like for most riders to be able to rev. I've said it before. I use the analogy of a dog chasing you. You don't want to do 80 all the time. If somebody's chasing you, you should be able to rev, or you want to get through a red light. Say the light is a late light and it's going to change soon. You should be able to stay in that same gear and rev it up to 100 RPMs to get through. That's just pure speed. We underuse our gears. That's why people keep asking, are you going to get the new 12 speed? I don't need to carry another gear. I don't need to carry another cog. Carrying too much already. Don't use that many. So yeah, I think you need to work on your cruising cadence. I think that's an effort. If you already been training for a while, look on our website. We have specific workouts for cadence. You can get one of those. So that people have asked over time, so we built them a long time ago and put them out there. But that's what you need. You need to increase your cadence. It will save your legs. It's possible you were tired. That's another thing you need to look at and think about. You never want to work out hard when you're tired because you're not going to improve. Your body needs rest. It's best to do it when you're fresh. So yeah. That's something to keep in mind when you do that. So let's see here. So we talked about power. So that's cool. So now power and heart rate I highly recommend. The heart rate belt is very inexpensive. For most of you that already have, say, a head unit, whether it's Wahoo or Garmin or whatever, you just need the belt that will be linked and paired to it for it to work. And the belts are between 35, 45 bucks, if that. And that's really good to have so you can know what your body's doing, how your body's responding to stuff. I think it's really very important because, as someone mentioned earlier, I was in this zone. I was putting out zone 5 watts, but I was in zone 2. Yeah, you can put out zone 5 watts in zone 2 because your heart rate at that time was only working in zone 2. Then you started to go hard. Maybe somebody took off. The power meter gives you instantly what you're doing. The power meter does it right now, and whatever you're doing at this second, it tracks instantly. The heart rate doesn't work like that. The body responds to what you are doing. So if what you are doing requires the heart rate to increase to get more nutrients and other things to your muscles and so forth, that's not going to happen instantly. That happens over a bit, a minute or so for it to catch up. That's why heart rate pacing is very effective when you're doing steady efforts, regardless of the zone. It responds best to steady efforts. Quick anaerobic efforts, heart rate is not applicable. That's just strength. And that's what the power meter would tell you. Boom, 1,000 watts. So then you've done 1,000 watts. Now, have you trained your body that after doing that 1,000 watts, you're not going to get dropped? Because, yeah, you can do 1,000 watts like I did to catch those guys on the hill. But you saw that after they finally caught up to me, I was still pulling. It was so hard for them to catch up to me that when they caught me, they couldn't even come around because I kept it hard. So you have to train yourself like that. Anybody can go hard for 10 seconds, but train yourself to go hard because that's how you open gaps. You attack, then you sit down and you work aerobically in a high zone. That's how you start breakaways or riding away from the pack. That's the kind of training you do for mass start events and so forth. So if you're just touring and you're doing other stuff with your bike, you don't need to do sprints and all of that. You just need to do steady rides. Doesn't mean you're going slow. It just means you're going steady. You're like a limo on the causeway and you're moving. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of training. It's almost like time trial training per se, although you're not going as hard. So it's important to know what your goals are and the kind of riding you're doing, especially if you're going to ride with groups, so you can pick the right speed zone per se, the part of the group to ride with. You don't want to ride with racers who are going to be surging all the time if that's not the kind of thing you're into. Then it won't be as much fun for you. So we're going to wrap up for the day. I will keep working with YouTube to improve this stuff, but so far I've really enjoyed this new format using something called OBS. You've probably heard of it. It's a free software, and I think I know why it's free, because the learning curve is high. I'm a techie. It took me 5 days to figure it out. I'm sure it takes the average person 5 weeks. It's not very intuitive. But once you figure it out, then you realize, okay, I see why they put things where they put them, So, but I like it. I think it's better than just using a generic YouTube webcam. I want to thank all of you, all of our super chatters. I really appreciate you supporting the channel. And I'm going to hopefully try to schedule this every Friday. I think Friday and Tuesday seem to be a good schedule. There's enough time when I release the group ride video. The group ride videos are important. Like you, Nad Sim, watch those group ride videos. You will see the kind of cadences we're using. And that will help you, because that's what it takes, And you don't need to be a pro rider to ride at high cadence. That just gives you the ability to accelerate repeatedly. But you have to train yourself over time so you can tolerate that, okay? So you guys, be safe. Get ready for the weekend. I will get some clips. I was able to get out a couple of times this week, even though it was hot. So I've gotten used to the heat. And we'll get out there and get some clips for you all. stay safe.